Welcome back to Write Out Loud, the podcast where stories shine, craft gets real, and creativity takes center stage. I'm your host, Matt, word nerd, plot enthusiast, and professional overanalyzer of fictional villains.
Yes,
I love that. Of course, I am here with the magnificent, magnetic, and marvelously mind-blowing Christina, our resident beam of light with a dangerously deep bookshelf. Hello, my dear.
Deep bookshelf. I like that one very much.
Yes. You want it on a t-shirt, do you?
I do. I do.
That's perfect.
Do you want to see my deep bookshelf?
Yes, yes. Well, that's right. So today we're actually talking about villains we love to hate and how we craft that complex antagonist, right? Not just that sort of black and white cookie cutter monster, but really bring them to life. And what we're really hoping to get out of this is to just have a solid discussion around what makes our villains that we love to hate so terrible and yet so lovable in the same way.
Yes. Yes. I think at the end of the day, for me, what it comes down to is when you create a full and vibrant villain that we like, oh God, they're so bad and I shouldn't like them, but they're so charming and lovable or whatever, for the aspect of villains we love to hate. When they create that kind of character, I mean, the writing then is just superb.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you and I have talked about, I think, and I don't think we've talked about it on the podcast, but I think you and I have had conversations around It Ends With Us, and just the fact that the antagonist or the villain, if you will, in that story, right, is somebody that you like, or you start to kind of feel for, right?
That is so, it's hard to say that obviously he is the villain of the story because he's an abuser. I hope nobody's listening to this that hasn't heard the story or anything, but the story's been out long enough that I don't feel like we need to pull any punches here.
Yeah.
When I first read it, I was already a fan of Colleen Hoover, and so I would just auto buy her books and not really look to see what they're about. When I love an author, I auto buy. And I worry about the story later because they're just going to take me on whatever journey they're going to take me on. And so initially when you're reading the book, you are falling in love with the character that ends up being the villain. Although I will say there was nothing I loved to hate about him. I just didn't like him. Yep. But yeah, that was the point. That was the point. And in fact, I think that is quite the point of what we're going to talk about here today, is the fact that you should create characters that, King, when we started talking about, doing this subject tonight, what popped into my head was what Stephen King was quoted as saying, and I'm going to read you the direct quote. So, writers must be fair and remember even bad guys, most of them anyway, see themselves as good. They are the heroes of their own lives. Giving them a fair chance as characters can create some interesting shades of gray, and shades of gray are also a part of life.
Yeah.
And I think your reference to the Colleen Hoover character that turns into this abuser is that exactly. It's a complex character. It is someone who, on the surface, you liked him, but then when his true personality self came out,
sure,
was clearly the villain of that story.
Yeah. And I think it goes back to audiences like characters that have depth. They like characters that
Yes.
have these layers to them, right? So it's not
Yes.
just, oh, he's clearly evil. He's going to do he's just going to kill everybody, and he doesn't think, he doesn't
Yeah.
care, he doesn't have any sort of emotion about it. He just does his thing.
Well,
And I think it helps them if they're able to see parts of themselves in that character, right? It's much,
Yeah.
it just plays with your mind a bit because you're like, oh, that kind of feels like me in some ways, but I would
Yeah.
never do that. And I don't know.
Yeah.
There's that internal
Yeah.
conflict that you have as the
Right.
reader.
Yeah, and I think that from the writer's perspective, as King was saying, is if you come at your villain of the story as someone who sees themselves as the hero, I think you can write more depth to that character. You can write it in a way, like when we say villains you love to hate, it's the bad guy that underneath it you can understand. It is the person that you can say, oh, okay, maybe they just had a bad experience, or they just
Sure.
want this revenge, or whatever the case may be. If they have depth, you can understand them. You still may not like them. That's why you love to hate them.
Yeah.
But you understand them a little bit better, and it makes for a more well thought out character, plot, story,
Yeah.
villain.
Yeah. I mean, think about, and I'm going to use this. There's two characters within the Harry Potter realm, right?
Yeah.
You've got Voldemort, who I think in that vein really does see himself as the hero of his story, because
Yes.
he's trying to unite the wizards and witches, right? As
Yep.
kind of like bring them together and make sure that they take their rightful place, right? So even if we don't agree with him, we understand why he wants to do it. I think there's another character in there that we love to hate, probably even more, causes more of a visceral reaction than anybody else, and that's Umbridge. And
Oh, yes.
I think Umbridge is one, though, where you have a harder time seeing why she does what she does. Like, I think
Yeah.
I think to a degree, she does also see herself as the hero. Like, she's keeping order. She's trying to help keep everybody in line and kind of
Right.
toe the
Right.
toe the company line, so to speak. But there's also just it's a quiet malice there, where she's just mean just to
Yeah.
be mean.
And I actually think that she has a more evil edge to her than Voldemort, because Voldemort has all these reasons for what he did and how he did what he did, and you understand he's the bad guy. This is going to come down to him and Harry. But Umbridge kind of sneaks in there because she's in the disguise of a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And in the beginning, when she comes on to the scene, she's in all her pink and she's just and it's like it takes you by surprise.
Yeah. Yep. Because you're
And-
thinking that this is somebody I'm supposed to be safe with.
Right. And then she gets worse and worse and worse and worse and worse. And so it's not Voldemort was bad from the very beginning.
Right.
Bad as a child, bad as a teenager, bad as a wizard. So, yeah.
And I think just in that piece, I think the point I want to make is when you're writing these types of characters, like there's a difference between the motivation of the character, which drives what they do, versus just pure malice.
Right.
And motivation, and this motivation that's tangible, that people can, even if they don't agree with it, can understand it.
Yeah.
I think tends to draw audiences in more often, or I feel that way, right? Like it's
Right.
when you can, because again, you're seeing a little bit of yourself in it. You can identify at least. And again, you don't have to agree with it. You don't have to like them anymore, but you can be
Yeah.
like, okay, well, I get it.
Are you trying to tell me you see yourself as Umbridge?
No,
You see a little bit of yourself as Umbridge?
no, because she's pure malice.
She is. That's why
No.
I said, I think,
No.
I don't sympathize with Voldemort, but I understand
Mm-hmm.
his, oh yeah, okay, this is what.
Yep.
But with Umbridge, like I said, she seems to be evil just for the pure sake of being
Mm-hmm.
evil. and like, oh, you know,
She gets joy out of it.
yes, exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. Just wants to win. But Umbridge, she just wants to be mean.
Yeah. And I think in part of this conversation too, I do think, and we want to draw a careful distinction that there is a difference, right, between evil and what we would call an antagonist, or a villain and what we call an antagonist. Like they aren't necessarily the same thing.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
let's put it this way. All villains are antagonists, but not all antagonists are villains.
Correct. And in fact, I use the lines of antagonist is an adversary. A villain is an evil.
Yep.
And like you said, you can have someone who is an adversary and they can be evil. You know, and, you know, vice
But they don't
versa.
have to
A
be.
villain, is definitely going to be your adversary, you know, no matter what. But I think I do want to make a distinction, because you can have antagonists who are two very good people, but they just do not see eye to eye and will see each other as the villains of the story. But we as readers, or we as writers, don't see them as good versus evil. You know,
Yeah, think about Ted Lasso.
Yes.
Right. There's a couple of examples there. So you've got Rebecca, who starts off as very much an antagonist because she's brought Ted in and is hoping to have a poor outcome, we'll say. We'll leave it at that in case you haven't seen it. And if you haven't seen it, what is wrong with you? The second piece is Roy, Kent, and Jamie.
Yes.
Very much an antagonistic relationship.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And
adversaries. They are adversaries.
Absolutely.
But neither one is a villain.
Nope.
And in fact, and this is actually a really great example of a story arc of a character, is Jamie's character. From where he goes in the beginning to where he ends up. Talk about redeeming the villain.
Yeah.
You know, because I do think in the beginning, he was an adversary and a villain. He was doing things on purpose to harm the other people, either on the team or the coaches or what have you. But the writers of that show clearly saw something in the very beginning that they wanted to do and give him a very good story arc.
Oh, absolutely.
So, yeah.
I think the only one that leaves a question mark in my mind from the Ted Lasso universe is Rupert.
Oh, yeah, he's
absolutely an antagonist, but is he a villain?
Yeah.
I don't know. I think it's arguable.
I say villain because he is purposely trying to be mean.
Yeah.
He is purposefully
Spiteful.
trying to hurt people, and he is purposefully trying to win.
Yeah.
And he will accept nothing more than winning.
Yeah, no, that's true. That's true.
Yeah, so to me, he's villain category.
So I think as we go through this, our whole point is to really lay out and give you the examples that help make it really clear. Like that as you're crafting these characters, you want to make sure that they have enough life in them that are going to draw the readers in and make them want to sometimes even cheer for them, maybe.
Yeah.
There'll be times when your reader goes, "Oh, I hope they make it through this one," while still not liking them, and while still maybe not agreeing with what they're trying to do. Like you still want them after your hero or your protagonist, but think about too. So there are some different archetypes when you think about archetypes when you think about the antagonists and the villains, right? So, for example, think about what we call, I guess, the mastermind or the brain. Someone like Littlefinger in Game of Thrones would fit this category. Someone like, Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah.
Right? Really fits that really well. And it's just somebody who's really incredibly intelligent, crafty, but does have a little bit of that evil vein running through them at least. So even if they're not pure evil. Any other ones you can think of from Mastermind or the brain category?
When you gave me this as an idea, I kept thinking to myself, what are villains I love to hate? What are the villains? The thing is, I think I do see characters having more depth and things like that. And so when I truly think of villains, in masterminds, I think of people like Hitler.
Yeah.
To me, that's like stand out. Like mastermind, he had this entire plan
Yep.
of destruction.
Yeah.
I
Think
think-
about Thanos.
Yeah, Thanos.
Same kind of
Someone
thing.
from the very beginning has this plan. Now, I don't find anything redeemable about Thanos, nor do I for Hitler. So I think that's where I have trouble coming up with these, because a lot of the books that I read have very morally ambiguous characters.
Sure.
And to me, sometimes those are the most juicy ones.
Yeah.
And a lot of times I have seen this happen time and time again, where the villains are speaking to the writers, and it's like they're demanding their own stories of like,
Yeah.
I am the
Yeah.
hero. You are going to make me a hero of a book someday. And that's happened more times than I can think. But back to the archetypes, there's also the fallen hero. The one that we talked a little bit taping of the Star Wars saga.
Sure.
Of specifically Star Wars A New Hope, which is the first movie to come out, but technically number 3 if you're, into
You're
the
keeping
numbers.
score at home.
Yeah, if you're keeping score at home. And this is a situation where in that particular movie, Darth Vader is the villain. He's a great character, a great villain. In that specific movie, so we're not talking about Return of the Jedi, I Am Your Father, and all that kind of stuff.
But he was a hero before that.
Yeah, but he was the hero before as Anakin.
Yep.
So this is what we're talking about with fallen heroes.
The devil.
Lucifer,
Yeah.
the TV show Lucifer.
Well, but even from just literally the Bible, right? The story, like the devil is a fallen angel.
yes.
So somebody
Yes.
who was
Very
a hero at one point and was
Yes.
now. So, but yeah, Lucifer.
Yeah, but
Good-
see,
good show.
Lucifer is the perfect. This is the only one I could think of when you were talking about villains we love to hate. I was like, Lucifer. But he ends up being, again, the good guy who occasionally does things that are morally gray.
Yeah.
But
The
at the
anti-hero
end of the
kinda.
day, too, he always told the truth.
Yep.
He never lied. And sometimes and I think this is what Stephen King, his point of that quote is that when you have characters that are so like gray, are they good? Are they bad? What are they? Yes, they're the heroes of their own stories. And in this story, maybe they're the villain. And then sometimes we get reasons as to why they are the way that they are, So, yeah. I think the fallen hero for me is probably my favorite sort of villain, because I feel like they can be redeemed.
Yeah.
They can find their way back.
Yep.
Yeah, you may have to do some extra work to redeem them.
Yeah.
But that makes for such juicy story.
Yeah. There's conflict baked right in, which is great.
Yeah.
The Charming Manipulator is the next archetype, and that one, the one I think of the most, is a little bit like Jamie Tart from Ted Lasso.
Yes.
Right? He'd be the Charming
Yes.
Manipulator. I also actually
Yep.
think Hannibal Lecter.
Yeah,
He's
you can call
kind
him
of-
charming.
He's also a mastermind, though, too, which is probably a little more.
Yeah.
I was trying to think. There was another one that was on the tip of my tongue just now, and I can't think of it. Oh, American Psycho.
Oh, jeez.
Like, just very, absolute manipulator, right?
Yeah. I'm sorry. That one in particular right there is straight to evil for me.
Yeah.
Straight to psychopath.
Oh yeah, definitely
Yeah.
a villain. Definitely a villain.
Yeah.
But the charming manipulator in that case,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think even Draco Malfoy kind of fits into this a little bit.
Oh, yeah, that's
right.
I would agree. Yeah.
Like he's a little bit of that charming manipulator. Like he's a bully. He's got some straight up
and a little
meanness
bit of
to him,
annoying,
but he's
and you
also
kind of want to flick him.
He's also a manipulator.
Yeah.
And then I guess the last one, at least in this little list, is just what we decided the system as a villain. So this is where that whole, like the villain or the antagonist is really just a whole like institution or like an idea of something.
Yeah.
The thing that comes to mind here is like, I guess the Blair Witch. Like even though there is supposedly this villain that is the witch,
right?
The entire story is the concept of this witch. That there you don't ever actually ever see the witch or get to know them or know their motivations. It's just there's this thing out there, right?
Right.
The Empire from Star Wars.
Yes.
Right.
Yep.
I think those are some of the ones. So there's just different ways that you can use these to your advantage as you build your villains, as you build your antagonists, to think about how do I create this layer to them or this depth, and how do I want to bring them to life. And these aren't all. There's more, right? There's a bunch of different categories, but this is just a quick little rundown of some of the most popular, I think.
Yeah.
But when you think about villains, one of the things that you have to really also come to terms with is they're going to do things in your story that may be absolutely horrific. But you still want your audience, in some cases, not in every case, but in some cases, you want your audience to maybe have a little bit of sympathy for them.
Right.
Right. So how do you craft that where you can bring that balance where you can say, listen, I don't agree at all with what he did, but I sympathize with why he's doing it or she's doing it.
You give them a good reasoning. Why are they the way that they are? You give maybe some insight into their hurt, their vulnerability, their one that I can think of. Here is a character that, and I'm speaking only of the TV show and not of the comics.
Okay.
But Negan from Walking Dead. And it is solely because of Jeffrey Dean Morgan, the actor who played him.
The Charming Manipulator?
About. Yeah, exactly. The Charming Manipulator. But again, that couldn't have, like if you had had a different actor playing that role, I don't know that the audience would have fallen in love with him, because I just, and in fact, I have trouble thinking about him being a redemption arc because of he killed one of my favorite characters and it was so brutal and it was awful and it was, but that's the perfect example, because then when you start revealing what happened to him and why his bat is named Lucille, start to, as you said, sympathize a little bit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, you just, again, some thought put into your villains. You want to think about what drives them, because again, that motivation,
Right.
rather than just pure malice,
Right.
is always going to be a better option. And just thinking about like even the inner conflict, right? You can think about stories where maybe, so for example, this latest season of Reacher on Amazon Prime, it's based on the book The Persuader by Lee Child. There is a villain that is very much a villain, but he is doing what he's doing to save his own skin. Right. So without giving too much away. And so you're creating that conflict in them, because it's like, well, look, I have to do this thing that I maybe even don't want to do. I mean, I'll do it because I don't really care, but I don't want to do it, but I have to do it. Otherwise I'm going to be dead. And that's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So
I'm doing this to save, in order to save myself. And that sort of thinking, we as readers can say, would I do the same in the same situation?
Yep.
You know, you can think of those circumstances where I have to do this in order to save XYZ, family, children.
Yeah. They might be trying to defend a whole system of being that's been in place for a long time, that the protagonist is trying to change because it's unjust or it's not the way it should be. And the villain is like, but no, this is the way we need to keep it. We shouldn't change it. And they're going to these horrific lengths to keep it as it is. Again, it's just creating that inner conflict and thinking about like, how do we make them more human So we put them in situations where even if they're bad people, they would make decisions you would not make. They're doing it for a specific reason, right? And I think ask yourself too, as you're really crafting your villain or your antagonist, is how do you make them believe that they're the hero of their story, and how do you bring that element into the story that you're telling, so it's very clear to the reader or the viewer, right? Depending on if it's a movie or TV show.
Consumer.
Yep, the consumer of your art. How do you get that point across to them so they understand that this person truly thinks they're in the right? They're the ones that
Well,
are the hero.
I think it's the same thing, is that you give them circumstances that actually do make them the hero of their story. So using Negan again, he was protecting his people.
Yep.
He was doing things out of the loss of his wife, his true love.
Sure.
He was doing things that he thought were the right things to do.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just it too, using Negan as that example again, is that sometimes villains are pushed so far to the edge that they have no way out other than to be, the way that they are.
Yep. Yeah, I think too, one thing that comes to mind in this one is President Snow from the Hunger Games.
Oh, yeah.
That whole trilogy. And just thinking about how, like, President Snow truly believes he's acting in the best interest of everybody. If you maintain the order as it is, everybody's happier because they have everything they need or they want, even if he's lying to himself or others. But, like, he believes that. And everything he does is to try to maintain that same status quo.
Yeah.
Right? Where Katniss and the rest of the team are trying to upend it because it's just an unjust type of living situation, type of world.
Type of world, yeah. Exactly.
Yep. It's crazy. So a lot of food for thought, I think. And if you think about how villains and protagonists really have to interact, it is sort of like a mirror image in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? Like they have to mirror those values that they might have. One's going to think this, one's going to think right, the other one's going to think left. And I don't mean politically, but just as the idea of that mirror image, we're gonna do this differently, right? But we're both, in the end, coming to the same kind of point of contact or the same, same line of scrimmage, to borrow a sports analogy.
Yeah.
They just have to do it their own way. And they're trying to get their ends achieved. And sometimes those things are at odds, and that makes it the most interesting a lot of times, especially when there's a lot on the line for both of them and they both have to get what they want. Just think about some of your favorite villains. Think about how they were written and how they come to life. Find your own examples as well of ones that fit some of those archetypes that we've talked about, right? And drop us a line. Who's your favorite villain? And why do you love to hate them? Like, tell us. Send us a voice note, drop us a note on Mastodon or Blue Sky or Threads or wherever you find us. Let us know, because we would love to hear your thoughts on this one. This is such a ripe area for so much discussion. I think we could probably go on for forever. But alas, we must always have, at some point, we must wrap it up, right? So... any closing thoughts that you want to share as we wind this one down?
I'm going to hearken it right back to Stephen King, the master of monsters and villains, if you will. That creating these morally gray spaces for the villains, making them the heroes of their own stories, I think really does create that perfect space for the villain. And again, when you make them have that appeal to the audience, you can suddenly take it from villain to antagonist and maybe give them their own redemption arc. And I think it just gives more depth to the writing, to the story.
Yep. Yeah, there's, I will just say, I'm not going to name the book that I'm reading, but this villain is just awful, and I don't mean that in the villain sense. It's a two-dimensional villain.
Yeah.
There's just no
Black and
dimension
white.
to it. It
Yeah.
doesn't make me care about them. It doesn't make me want to read why they became the way that they became. I don't care. I literally don't care.
Yep.
So unfortunately, not the best one, but you're going to find those. And I think you can also learn a lot from the ones that you've read that don't work.
Right.
Because you can,
Very
you
true.
can literally look at that and go, hey, like this is how I don't want to write my villain because
Yeah.
they need more depth or they need more. I need to understand
Yeah.
their motivation better.
Yeah, exactly. I think at that point, if you come across a villain that you're like, oh, this is totally black and white and boring and everything, break down why it didn't work for you. And then, you can use that the next time you're writing a villain to avoid.
Exactly. Well, that's a wrap on our deep dive into villainy. And if there's one thing we hope you take away from today, it's that great villains are not just evil for evil's sake. They're driven, they're wounded, they're human, and when they're done right, they're going to elevate your entire story. So if you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you shared it with your fellow writers. And you know what? Again, don't forget, tell us who your favorite villain is, why you love to hate him. We'd love to see that. Throw it out there on social media as well. #WriteOutLoud. Well, thanks so much for joining me, my dear, as always.
Yeah.
And thank you for listening. And don't forget, keep your characters messy, your plots twisty, and your antagonists unforgettable. So until next time, write out loud. Hey, thanks so much for listening to the podcast. We really hope that you're enjoying every bit of it, but we would love to hear your feedback. Drop us an email either to matt@writeoutloudpod.com or christina@bookmatchmaker.com. We would love to hear your thoughts. What's working, what's not working, and what do you want to hear more of? Thanks so much. We really appreciate it.